Welcome to the Pure Heart Church podcast. My name is Zach Good. I have the awesome opportunity to be the producer on this podcast. And I think that whether you're part of our church community or you're just tuning in, we've got a great episode for you today. Join our hosts, Heath Bottomley and Matt Nystrom, as they sit down with Alex Friend and Brenna Pavkov and talk about what it's like to navigate being a multi-generational church and what that looks like in preaching the gospel, worship, and many other capacities in the church environment. We're so glad that you tuned in with us today, and let's jump right in.
So today on this episode of the Pure Heart Church podcast, we are joined by Alex Friend and Brenna Pavkov.
Hey.
And we're actually just jumping in talking about the topic of generations and what church looks like, given, anywhere from millennials to Gen Alpha, and also some of us who are on the other side of that. Us, we're both
I'm
Gen
an
Xers.
Xennial.
You're
an Xennial.
You are. I aren't. Yeah, I'm at the end of the Gen X's.
Yeah.
And so, but that's a wide demographic of people that make up the current church.
Yeah.
But different generations, well, I've got to take on that as well, but it looks like different generations, they connect with church differently. And what appeals to them in ministry is different. And so we just kind of wanted to get your guys' take on what you're seeing, what you feel about that, and kind of what connects with you.
Yeah. So. I think it's interesting, even as a worship leader, I get the opportunity to lead pretty much what I would consider two different congregations within Pure Heart. I lead with our youth and our young adults, and then I also lead with our adults. And even just planning out a set list looks so different between the two congregations, knowing the things that maybe they're walking through, the things that they relate to, and maybe even the basis of biblical knowledge that they come into the room with.
Oh,
a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they just didn't grow up in church or they don't read their Bibles. And so even picking out a set list or songs or things we're going to talk about, there's a lot of times I have to catch myself and realize I'm assuming that they know something that they actually might not know. And so that's been an interesting challenge to kind of figure out, like, are we picking songs that our students understand? When we use terms like tongues of fire, do they have context? Do they know what that means?
Right.
So I've been walking through that a lot lately, just with song choice. I don't know if you've noticed that leading a lot more in like adult services.
Well, yeah, actually, I was going to say something where it's funny how you can decipher music differently, where it's like, oh, that's definitely a youth song. That's definitely an adult song. But it's just how songs have changed just throughout time of we're now putting an age and a demographic to the music itself of, oh, well, that's, this is definitely for the older generation or the, as we say, more experienced generation.
The big church.
And or if it has more of a type of feel, it's like, oh, the youth would love this and they would be that. And it's just, it astounds me of, but what's being said is all truth. Like,
right.
Why does the feel of the music change the message that's being portrayed throughout it?
Yeah, it's interesting even with we have other churches who are producing music and almost all of them now have like that youth counterpart. You look at Elevation and they have that youth counterpart of Elevation Rhythm, which has a younger sound that younger people just connect to and it feels like something that they can latch on to. And it's, Heath, you were kind of talking about this idea the other day, but it's like being in the world, but not of the world, but also becoming all things for all people so that some would be saved. And so it's meeting them in the culture that they're in and what their music sounds like and the language that they use. So yeah, it's so interesting.
I think it's even, we're old enough to have seen, and it still happens in some places, but it's not as common now, but the 8 a.m. service is the traditional service.
Totally.
10 o'clock service, that's the younger family's service. But even that it's going through this huge shift. I also think about like when I was young, there wasn't a lot of Christian music that fit genres that I enjoyed even listening to. I was kind of a skater kid and stuff. And suddenly they came out with Tooth and Nail Records.
Oh, yeah.
And Tooth and Nail Records, they
MXPX
suddenly had like MXPX and Plank Eye and stuff. And suddenly there was music that you could like go to a concert of.
Cool.
That wasn't, as I thought at the time, a weird concert. Like a for him concert or something like that. It was a band. It was stuff that would be music that you'd actually like listen to.
Was For Him a band?
Well,
it was a grown-up boy band.
It was a musical.
They were 30 somethings boy band.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is
Christian
not
boy band.
but man band sounds weird. So
man band.
We'll keep rolling.
Better than man buns.
Yes, anything's better than man buns. So,
but yeah, so I think it is interesting just to see. And if you even go further back, hymns, let's say, I noticed that I do love the fact that some of the ways we've incorporated things like that into moments of we came back from COVID. There were some hymns and stuff that we'd do that Dan would. It's like, hey, kind of connecting to this like depth and culture of things that it's just different. It has a different feel. It has a different reflectiveness, maybe.
Yeah.
But I am with you with Brenna on this. The verbiage, the assumptions of familiarity that we have with things is because I do agree. I think there's a lot of hymns that are timeless. Like what they said then, they say now with the same authority.
Right.
But are they being said in a way that people understand the terminology? You know? Even stuff. I mean. A friend of mine, Brian Tabor from Worship Probs, he just had a prayer concern where basically a comment card that came in, and they're like, we got to stop singing all these songs about hell. And he's like, what song are you talking about? And they were talking about Another in the Fire.
Oh,
wow. And it was like, but so it wasn't even an age. It was more of just like you said, the biblical literacy of going, that's not talking about hell at all. It's referencing a story in the Bible but they were unfamiliar with it. And so the assumption was like, they'll get it. They know what we're talking about.
Another in the Fire. Wow, that takes like a whole different meaning.
That gets really dark really fast,
Wow.
And so, but I think we do that there is a certain level of assumption that we have.
Yeah.
And I remember even the last church that I was at, we would do the whole thing when we were asking people to open their Bibles. We would hand out Bibles at the door, but we'd tell them what page number and things like that, and going, because we weren't just going, hey, you're going to turn to Matthew and just assume people knew. We go,
know where that is.
In your table of contents, and it's also the first book in the New Testament, and stuff like that. Simply because we just knew people weren't going to be familiar.
And I love that, because I think when we think about what it is to be a minister or a pastor or worship leader, whatever our role might be, like we're serving people. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in like the right way of doing things that we forget that we're serving people. And so even taking a look at, okay, what is my congregation? What is the demographic? How can I best serve them? Maybe you're in a small little church and they don't want drums, and it's like it's a congregation who that is distracting for them. And maybe it would be the best to serve them with hymns, and that's the way that they're going to connect and grow with God. And it's our job then as ministers to serve them and help them to grow. There's this scripture, and it was so funny. I was actually sharing it with a class of young worship leaders a couple weeks ago, but this is in Mark. It says, this is Jesus talking, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many. And so it's like almost asking the question, looking at maybe my youth group, how can I serve them? What kind of music is going to help them connect? And it's kind of sometimes putting our own preferences aside to speak the language of whoever it is that we're talking to.
Yeah. It makes me, you had brought it up where the passage I brought up this week in Hebrews 5 talking about just being mature in our walk with Christ. And because we are all born spiritually dead, and having that immaturity can be so painful and hurtful for us because it veers us down a path that we just don't know. We don't know better. And so to be able to be called into leadership and called into be a servant of the Lord is also, you have to be mature in your walk with Christ, because you don't realize people are going to be looking up to you. And so even as a younger person on staff, I get inspired by people that are new to faith, that are older than me, because they still have this childlike love and childlike rule following of, man, I've been, in church my whole life, and I don't think I've ever had faith like that. And so it's almost inspiring. And so to be able to still learn from people by serving them, it has that weird give and take where you don't expect to be receiving something back, because you're like, oh, well, I'm here to serve. I'm here to use my gift and all that kind of stuff. But man, this person just taught me more than I thought I was giving them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I think you also, to that point, that when you're serving, it doesn't always keep you from it, but it reduces the chance of you getting entrenched in what you need, because your focus is on what they need. And usually where we get stuck is when we're going, but I need this. We're kind of hardwired that way. I can't tell you how many people will come up to me and go, hey, you can help with song selection, right? On the weekends. I'm like, well, I mean, kind of, and they don't wait for me to finish. They just tell me, they're like, if we could just do this song, oh man, it would be so powerful. And digging a little bit deeper, what it usually is that song had a connection for them at a certain point in their life.
Sure.
And because it affected them that way, they are making the assumption it's going to affect everyone else the same way. Yeah. And I think generationally, we do the same thing. There are things that hit us, I was talking with Dan Steffen, and we were throwing around a DC Talk song, and he jumped right into it. And I'm like, how do you, was that one of you? And he's like, hey, that was youth group. It's like, and we automatically were transported to an era and a time where our lives had dynamic change, and we associated that music with it. But we can't cookie cutter that and go, okay, if I was changed because of this, today's youth are going to be inspired by it in the same way. No, because that connection hasn't been made for them with that material. It's something else, But I think it doesn't stop there, not just with music. I think I'm finding that generationally there are ways that people connect to church even differently. What the things that are important to them about a church are different than even previous generation. I know my generation has this push for certain things that we like about a service. We, want to make sure this is taken care of. We want to make sure our kids have a good place and everything.
Yeah.
But like my kids, they want to know that they're a part of something that matters, that they're putting their time towards something that makes a difference. And honestly, they could do without a bunch of the other stuff that matters to me if they knew that what they were rolling up their sleeves and doing was making a difference in the world. Part of me doesn't know if that's necessarily a generational thing, but the fact that maybe I forgot, because that mattered to me too, greater, I think, at different stages of my life, but it's so fresh for them.
Yeah.
That it's almost like, was I like that? Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I was, and maybe I still should be, but I've been finding that more and more. And more dominant because I think that age bracket is hitting adulthood.
Yeah.
And so it's beginning to be a higher call, a higher demand in church. But have you seen differences like that in your interactions?
It's honestly, it's difficult for me because I've been so heavily involved with music like my entire church life. I mean, my dad was a worship pastor, so I just grew up going to church, grew up being in music. And so when I think church, I think music. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult for me to, I guess, separate the two just because that's where, but I mean, as far as even as simple as I grew up wearing bow ties to church. And so that's just awesome. Attire. And so to be able to,
that doesn't shock me though with you.
I will take that as
you are the grandfather of our group.
Yes. Yeah. Anyways. And so, I mean, just attire, alone of now we're at a church where it's not necessarily, because I was forced to it as this is a need. You're dressing up for God. You need to look your part to be able to be in the presence of the Lord. But thinking about it, I was like, well, okay, can you help me? Where is that in Scripture? Where is that like you need to wear a bow tie for the Lord? Where is that in? And so it just kind of a perspective change too of just as simple as what am I going to wear to church? And that, as far as me, that's what I've kind of seen and kind of what has stuck the most, just because I miss wearing my bow tie. But
well, you're more than welcome to
bow ties.
Yeah. Bring those back.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even just what we're doing now, like sitting down and creating podcast content, like creating things to go on social media, the ways that people are going to connect, especially these younger generations. That's how they want to connect. I feel like you see young families and they're church hunting and they might go and like listen to the podcast beforehand or go on YouTube and listen to sermons. And like, there's so many things, first of all, on social media that people could listen to. Even on my own TikTok page, I get like 100 different perspectives on theology and people's takes on the Bible. And some of them are like way off base. And so I think it is important that we're showing up in like the social sphere and putting things out that are biblically true and that care for people and that spread the gospel. So I think it's important that we do show up, but it's interesting to think like 20 years ago, we would have never thought to do this. Yeah. Like it was all mostly around Sundays. And now I feel like a lot of what we're putting our time and energy into, like, of course, Sundays still matter, but like, what are we doing throughout the week to help and encourage people to not just be Sunday Christians, but to be 7 days a week, all throughout the year, someone who has a relationship with Jesus Christ. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Even like you mentioned TikTok, I was reading an article about how Google is like for young people, like an ancient word, and they don't associate with it because they don't Google stuff.
Right.
If they want to know an answer to something, they go look it up on TikTok. They search for videos of reviewing this or
I totally do that.
information. Yeah. And so suddenly it's like even how they're like capturing like what is church about? What is Christianity about?
Explorer.
I'm not going to lie, I do.
Netscape.
Oh man.
He's binging things.
But just even the way they, acquire information and relate to things is totally different. Even I remember the shift of when churches begin to have web pages, and even Pure Heart went through this, where it's like we had to make two different web pages, one for computers and one for a mobile app, and we'd have to update them both separately. And it was like, man, I can't believe we're doing this. We need to, because I know some people are, and it's just an interesting development that things go through.
It's funny you say that, because even just the online experience as a whole is the difference between live stream and having an actual online service. I mean, I know a lot of people where they think church online, they just think this camcorder recording of a live stream service, and it's like, how do people connect to that? But to be able to adapt to answering that question of how can we reach people outside these four walls, because to have that big C church be more people related, and so to be able to have that, and because I mean I can't tell you how many conversations I've had of like, oh yeah, our online it's thriving. I was like, how? It's because they just relate to a live stream and just real grainy pictures, and so to be able to help adapt with that, I mean, we want to keep up with where the world is going technology wise too, and then that kind of going off what you were saying of now we have capabilities of podcasts and be able to, you can listen to either church sermons or dive into the Word outside of Sunday, and so now we're just keeping up with the world of technology, and of course it's going to keep growing, and hopefully we can keep up with it.
Yeah, it's showing up and making a difference where people are. Like in a sense, it's being missionaries. And what's so cool too is like the more people are consuming this kind of content, the more that people are listening to podcasts like this or visiting Instagram pages or TikTok or whatever, the very algorithms that were designed for them are going to start to give them more and more Christian content and more things that are going to fill them with life, and not, I mean, there's so much ugliness on social media that people could be consuming. And so like, how cool is it that we get the opportunity to show up and literally be like these digital missionaries and reach people and help to change their feed even? Like, it's so cool.
I think it's so hard though for the church a lot of times, because the people that, and this isn't to be critical, it's just sort of the reality, the people that control the finances or the direction of ministries many times are kind of older. And so they look at like, what do we need to make and do and have for the weekend and that type of stuff. And so they look at how much time would this take to make all these things? Well, who's going to watch that? Because they're not in front of them. And I think that's been the thing we've had to adapt to with our online is go, hey, we will never see a majority of these people ever, but like, let's try and get the feedback we have. Let's ask good questions. Let's try and look at the best data we have of how can we connect with these people that we'll never meet. We never know. What are their needs where they're at? Obviously there's things that as a human being, we know our needs, but beyond that, what are their soul needs? What are their questions they have in their relationship with God, and creating stuff that is, I mean, the amount of content they can gravitate into is so negative. Like, how can we be a light in the midst of that?
What's really interesting to that point is you get familiar with your system, your way of doing things, the mannerism in which you connected with, say, ministry, churches in general. And you look at the first century church, everyone goes, oh, the first century church didn't do that kind of stuff. Well, of course not. They didn't have that technology, first off. But it did say, they gathered together daily in people's homes and things like that. But if you look at the last couple hundred years, we became a very event-based, actually the last several thousand years, very event-based with what churches look like. We weren't meeting every day, but we were meeting on the weekends, and it became this big thing. We're gonna meet together this weekend. What the introduction of social media and also like short form content, things like this or whatever, what it's done is it's actually shifted the narrative back and the storytelling back to where it becomes something where people are meeting daily and engaging daily.
I love that.
But the defensiveness of going, you're taking away from the event, it's like, but the event it actually becomes better
Yeah.
Because it's being fueled by constant interactions and community during the week. But it's interesting. We get so attached to our methodologies when our preferences become beliefs. I think generationally, there is a group of people that it's hard for them to turn that corner because this is what we did.
Yeah.
You're taking away from what we did and how I experienced God. You know, you even have some of that denominationally going, this is how you experience God. No, this is how I experience God. But I think generationally, we're dealing with the same thing across the board where people are going, what does church look like if it doesn't look like this? Mm-hmm. You know, but people are embracing it differently. And I think actually in a more consistent way, I think there's an argument there to be made. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is a natural ebb and flow to generations. And to some of the points that have been said, like, you're never going to be cool to the generation that's coming up after you. They're going to find their own way. That's part of the process. They're trying to find their own way. And so they will naturally push against yours. And same thing with kids, though. You might end up in 20 years landing in the same place. You might have more in common then at that point. But there is that natural progression. But I think the thing is not getting locked into a system. One of my favorite stories in the Gospels is when it tells the story of a bunch of people who are lame or injured or they can't, walk, can't see, any of these things. It said that they would gather around this pool. And the reason they gathered around is because it says that an angel would come in and stir the waters, and the first one in would be healed. What it doesn't say is how often that happened. Or, I mean, for all we know, it could have happened once. But what's interesting is that had become so the focus of how they thought they were going to get their healing, that when Jesus walked into the room, when he walked in there, no one was looking at Jesus. They were looking at the pool because they had locked into their system. And I think for us, generations or whatever it is, I think a lot of times we can start looking at the pool for our healing.
Yeah.
Instead of looking for Jesus walking in and going, that might be the new way that this could happen. Mm-hmm. This my healing might actually come from something different than what I've gotten used to. Yeah. And so I think if we keep that at the forefront, I think we're going to be okay.
Well, I think even as we look at the church, all the mental health type of stuff that's come into the conversation as we're talking about healing, that I remember when we first started at Pure Heart, I did, like that was still kind of the weird thing that some church were doing. Oh, you guys have a counseling ministry. You guys are focused on physical health and stuff. And it's like now it's becoming very prevalent. And it's like, well, where's Jesus at? Well, he wants our healing of our heart, our soul. Like
you're not going to be able to see where you're going if you're too busy looking in the rearview mirror.
Totally.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate this. It's been a good conversation. I think it's as anything, it's just scratching the surface of something that I think we're walking through day in and day out. So love to have you guys back. Of course, I know I will. We'll enjoy having you guys back. Yeah, maybe not. No, bring a bow tie.
I actually still have, I think,
I
6 or 7.
Spin, though.
Yeah,
yeah, right.
That would be amazing. So thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a great episode. And we've got a great episode next week. If you were here on our campus in the last few weeks, you may have heard about a big announcement that we had coming up about the future plans for our church and some awesome ministry opportunities that we're going to get here in the Valley. So if you did not hear that, you're going to really enjoy it. And if you did hear about it, you're going to hear more in depth about what's going on. And so it's going to be a great thing. So make sure you tune in next week. And if you enjoy our podcast, you want to continue to hear more podcasts, make sure you subscribe and follow our podcast so you don't miss out on a thing. So glad you joined us today. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you next week.